Please welcome back Reed Clay with PUC Chairman Thomas Gleeson and Bill Blevins. We just have to play the music a little bit longer.
I'm ready. Well, here it's fine if you got the time. And I tend to get yourself and here it's fine. I'm all down.
All right, we're going to talk electricity for the first time these 2 days. Just kidding. Look, I thought we'd have Thomas and Bill here to really give you guys a sort of detailed view about what's going on in Texas. I mean, I think everybody understands kind of the high level, lots of demand growth. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Very interesting, really decade plus, but even the last 5 years in terms of generation growth have been very interesting, and then certainly the public policy surrounding that. Those issues has been something that has been well discussed, maybe an understatement, in the Texas Capitol really since Winter Storm Uri in 2021, so the past 3 legislative sessions. But I thought I would start with making sure and kind of setting the table so there's a pretty clear understanding about the PUC's role and ERCOT's role and the intersection and interplay between those two extremely important entities that really make up our electricity policy and the operation of our grid here in Texas. So, Chairman, if you would, could you kind of set the table for us?
Sure. So the relationship between ERCOT and the PUC is really unique because ERCOT is fully held within the state. And so if you look to the statute, it says that the PUC has complete authority over ERCOT, and that is true statutorily. I will say in reality, it is a partnership, right? We are with them as they're making their tough decisions, but I in no way, nor anyone at the agency, gets in their way when they're trying to make operational decisions in the control room. I think that would be a disaster. And so I think at the base level, it is a partnership where we work collaboratively. Ultimately, we do have to approve a lot of the work that they do when they're looking to make revisions in the market, but we do not get in the way when it comes to their sole job, which is to ensure reliability on the grid. That is their mandate. We help them, but we in no way get in, try to overturn any decision that they're trying to make when it comes to grid operations.
Bill, you want to add any color on that?
Well, I guess I'm an ex-Navy guy, so I would say they're kind of like the admiral, and we're the guy that's driving the boat. So we do make those decisions as we need to, but they kind of give us the policy and the direction that we need to go in, and we try to implement that. So that's kind of the way I see it.
Right. Okay, so I thought we'd start with what I think, are, the headlines that we see. If you're paying attention, obviously, to the Texas grid, you see almost daily, which is talking about demand growth and demand forecast. There are different numbers out there, and we can talk about that in a minute about which number is real. But just in terms of the sort of astronomical growth that we're seeing, Chairman, what is, from a public policy perspective, how do you guys think about the very daunting task of meeting that demand?
Yeah, I mean, if you've seen the numbers, right now we're a peaking system of around 85, 86 gigs. ERCOT put out a report earlier this year saying that in 2031, the estimate was around 220 gigawatts. If you're asking me if I think that's the real number, I don't. I think that's definitely on the high end. If you ask me if I thought directionally, is that correct? I do. I'm not going to be surprised if we're around 150 gigs in 2031. And so the question becomes, how do we get from where we are today to where we need to be in 2031? And as an economic regulator, what I think about all the time is, are we providing the right economic incentives to end up with the outcomes that we really need, which is we need more generation in this state. We need more thermal dispatchable generation in this state. If you look at the generation interconnection queue right now at ERCOT, There's somewhere in the order of 170 gigawatts of batteries and 170 gigawatts of solar. That's tremendous. I say often renewables are great. They help keep costs down. But to really build into that growth that we're going to see here, we need more baseload generation. And so we are trying at the commission every day to look at the incentives that we're putting forth to see if we're getting those outcomes we want. And the outcomes we need now are more thermal dispatchable generation in the state. And it's one of the reasons I was excited to come here and talk about nuclear.
So just to, drill down on that for a minute. I mean, when you see the demand forecast, it's usually put in terms of next year, next couple years, and then 5 years out, so 2030, like you just mentioned. One of the criticisms, or at least alleged criticisms of nuclear, is that it may not arrive in time to meet that demand. So to what extent is the PUC and ERCOT taking a view? I mean, obviously the task in the next 5 years, as you just mentioned, is very daunting. So, a lot of focus has got to be played to, one foot in front of the other. But to what extent do you guys, when you're setting these policies and thinking about operating the grid, are you thinking long-term about how the growth is probably not stopping in 2030, but it's going to continue into 2035 and 2040, if, particularly we're talking about AI, if, the AI boom is what, we think it's going to be?
Yeah, I mean, we look at it holistically and comprehensively. I think it would be foolish for us to just look at the short or medium term. We have to look long term. If we believe in the Texas miracle, like I think all of us do, we know even if 220 gigs doesn't come in 2031, it's coming eventually. And so to just focus on kind of short-term outcomes, I think would be the wrong policy play. So we talk about and discuss all the time, what are we doing today to set us up for success in 2030, 2035, 2040, and out even into 2050?
Bill?
Yeah, I've got, I think maybe a slide that I'll kind of put up there just so you can kind of see what we're looking at. And I think it kind of highlights what Chairman Gleeson just mentioned as far as looking out. Really, this is more the planning world of things, and what we did recently was kind of adjust what we were getting in from everybody to do a little bit more credibility to what we believed could be the outcome. And if you look at that, it kind of has a breakdown of different types of load that would be coming into the grid. And you can see the projection out there far out is like 218 gigawatts in the grayish area, but then we really adjusted it down because it's going to take a while to build that. It's going to take generation to serve that. There's a lot of pieces to that. Then I will probably want to show you, this is actually what I track. This is all the large loads that you're probably hearing about in the news. And this is something we've been tracking for about 3 years. And it's a large amount of requests, but we have to figure out how much is really going to come.
Yeah, Bill, if you'd go back just one to that previous slide. One more, there we go. So, as I look at this out in 2030 and 2031, that delta between, say, the 138, 145, and then to the top of the gray, the way I look at my job is we don't want our policies to be the constraint on that delta. If 145 gigs worth of load want to be here, we want that to be able to come here. If 160 want to come, or 180 or 200, we need to be looking to implement policies to accommodate that. And so that's really what we're trying to do. We're looking at these as forecasts, but we don't want to have electricity be the constraint that keeps all of these businesses and people from wanting to come to Texas.
So, Bill, real quick, I mean, you talked about what does the gray number there represent? So, just looking at, 2020, I can't read that actually. 2026 says 109 gigawatts versus the 95. What is the gray? What does that number represent? You say you taking everything you get in so this room understands what does that mean?
So that shaded, or light gray shaded, is the overall number that we've got collected from all the different utilities. And then
requests for interconnection.
Those are requests, but those requests are not very detailed. And you have to start looking at asking questions about, do they have the permits? Can they actually cite this? How far along are they in actually building what they've requested. That might be an overall goal of theirs, but is it achievable? And we did a lot of work behind the scenes, actually, to try to find out how this should shake out based on those overall requests. And that's where we got the lower number, the 145. So that was something that we did a lot of work with the utilities, a lot of surveys, talking to different customers. We've also talked to other grid operators outside of our area just to see what their experience has been with some of these types of loads, and trying to adjust those as best possible, because we're going to build and try to support that, and we want to make sure we're building for the right amount.
Okay. And then let's talk about type for a minute, Bill, and geography, I think. I think, those are two questions that maybe sometimes the top line number gets a lot of attention, and sometimes we don't kind of dig into the information about the type of load and where the load is going, which obviously are very important questions when you're, operating a grid. I think you have a slide here that sort of has a pie chart of the breakdown. So if you would kind of tell us, you have I guess some of that is here, but it's a little bit hard to see, but where's the load growth going to come from most likely, and where in the state are we going to see that load growth?
Well, so I would say that blue number is kind of the existing growth, maybe some residential, smaller load. But in the large load, you kind of see this data center gray, darker gray, and you can see that start to expand, and it's got something like 24 gig out there in 2031, I believe it is. So it's the real driver of that extra growth that we see. But there are other, crypto mining started coming in, I guess a few years ago. So it has a part to play in this. We've got other industrial types of loads. There were some hydrogen projects that were being proposed. They may be shifting to going to more data center at this point. Just traditional oil and gas load that we have in the state that we've had for a long time. So that's kind of how it breaks out as far as the projected amount that is growing on top of the base load, which is that shaded blue.
Okay. And geographically, where are we seeing?
All over the state.
All over the state.
Really out in West Texas a lot, up in the Panhandle, down in the Valley, so just really everywhere.
Yeah, and I would say as we talk primarily to the hyperscalers who are looking to come here, they're looking for areas perhaps where there's existing transmission constraints to locate there, and where there's existing infrastructure, whether that be 345 kV lines, existing gas pipelines if they think they're going to need to offtake gas, things like that, water availability. Those are all important to them. And so based on kind of that criteria, that's where they're looking to locate. But I would say Bill is right. There are so many attributes of Texas that as we talk to the hyperscalers and data centers, they're looking for anywhere in Texas because so many of the attributes of Texas are appealing to them.
So there's been a lot of, just from the public policy, obviously this is a lot of large loads, a lot of AI. AI is something that everybody in this room is, somewhat a fan of because it's driving a lot of demand for nuclear, new nuclear. I think large loads and maybe, and I don't want to pick on any one type, but data centers, and I'll use that term broadly. Some people may not like the way I'm using it, but, to encompass traditional data centers, AI data centers, and, even crypto mining operations, that is a very significant piece of the load growth that we have seen and are going to see, and is, as a result, been a very, big topic of discussion inside the Capitol. What do you see, what are the, how do we walk the line between the comment you made a minute ago, which is we don't want electricity to be the constraint, with also making sure that, our grid is not overtaxed with all this large load growth?
Yeah, I think we need to make sure that we're doing this in a managed and orderly way. And one of the differences about this load as opposed to previous industrial loads that we've had to deal with is the pace at which these data centers want to start ramping and become fully ramped up is extraordinary. So if you think about the city of Lubbock when it came into ERCOT, the city of Lubbock total is about 800 megawatts. We're talking about multiple data center facilities that want 500 megawatts, a gig and a half over the next, say, 7 to 10 years. And so that's just an amount of energy needed that our planning process doesn't really account for. And so we have to look to change the way that we plan for these loads. And then I think, really have to look at the way we allocate costs. I think one thing we cannot lose sight of is who is paying for all of this. And I will say, whether it's on the generation side or the transmission side, I've been heartened in the conversations I've had with data center builders who have said they are willing to bring their capital to bear to get to Texas to help be good partners with the state to ensure that costs are not borne exclusively by residential ratepayers, and they can bring additional generation to ensure that grid reliability is not impaired. Because you're right, Reed, that is the number one thing, especially with the backdrop of URI. No matter what we do, we have to ensure that grid reliability is our North Star. And I think Senate Bill 6 from this last legislative session gave us a lot of really good guardrails for ensuring that these new large loads can come on in an orderly and managed way, but still meet the needs that they have.
Could you just walk us through the 2 or 3 key tenets of Senate Bill 6?
Yeah, so the kind of the foundational one for me, and we've talked about kind of this load projection number, it requires the PUC to standardize the way that transmission distribution companies are counting loads. So if you look like in 2031 at that 218 gigawatt number, that is, the total of all the different transmission companies saying this is what our customers are saying they're going to need by 2031. All of the transmission companies don't count those numbers the same way. So it's important to get that number right. And it's important for 2 main reasons. One, we don't want to overbuild transmission. We don't want to allow transmission companies to build to 218 gigawatts of capacity when we only need 150 because people are paying for infrastructure that isn't necessary. You have intergenerational equity issues around that. The second thing is, as we kind of started this conversation around economic incentives, if there is a true belief that in 2031 we're going to need 218 gigawatts of electricity to serve that load, you would see forward electricity prices spike. That would be the incentive that you would need to see the dispatchable build that we're hoping for. We have not seen that because there is not a lot of, people don't trust that number is accurate. So the foundational thing that it did is require us to standardize the way that we're counting that. Second, and I think also very important, is it's going to require that any data center company let ERCOT know if they are looking to put a project in multiple jurisdictions in multiple areas of the state, anywhere else, because we don't want to be double counting projects. Again, building for those, planning for those, and then some small fraction of them actually, come to fruition. So that's another big piece. And the final one I would talk about is co-location with existing resources. So this has been a topic of conversation, I'd say, for maybe the last year or so, where data centers, because speed to power is one of their top, if not their top need, have looked to sign PPAs with generation companies for existing resources that are currently serving the bulk power system. My feeling on that is generally 99.9% of the time, I don't care if that provides additional revenue to those generators that they can then use to build new generation in the state. That's great, but there are definitely going to be certain times where the grid is constrained, where we have low resource adequacy, and we need those resources to serve the bulk power system. So it's Senate Bill 6 is requiring the PUC to come up with rules around that, again, to make sure not to prohibit or preclude it, but to make sure it's done in a way that doesn't impair reliability. And I think those are all really good changes to the law that will help ensure that the data centers can get the power they need, but Texans can be assured that they will have a reliable grid.
Okay. Bill, real quick, zoom in on one geography and one industry in particular, and I know there are other industries that are causing demand growth in West Texas, but we've talked a lot about transmission and how that can or could be the bottleneck for bringing this load online. West Texas is a huge place. Oil and gas, I don't know if this is the right number anymore, but it used to be 17 gigs of new power to electrify the oil and gas operations, plus obviously some other loads out there. How, and how's that going to happen? What is how are we going to ensure that happens in an orderly way? How are we going to allocate? That's a huge infrastructure project, right? So how do we manage that infrastructure project in a timely way, and in a way that, as you said, Chairman, doesn't delay these projects from coming online?
Well, I mean, traditionally, we've been able to construct these lines, and if you had I'll give you an example, the chip factory that's going in over in Taylor. That facility took several years to construct, so we had time to see that load, put it into our planning, construct the upgrades that we needed. These data centers are coming in faster than that. You can put a building in and fill it up with GPUs and start consuming quite a bit of load a lot more rapidly for that type of industry. Same with Bitcoin miners, that electronic load. So what we're going to have to do is really, and I think we've started to do, is really look at bigger transmission upgrades. And I think that's something that recently got approved. And so we have some plans to use a higher voltage than we've used traditionally. It was something that's been reviewed and evaluated multiple times. It's actually something we reviewed back when we built what we call CREZ many years ago. I think this time we actually went a step further and used some transmission that is used in the world pretty traditionally, 765. So there's some plans to build that, and that should give us a lot more capacity for the same territory or transmission right away. So it's really going to help us serve more, and actually it's going to give us some flexibility if things change. So I think there's some benefit long term.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. As the commission was debating whether or not to step up from 345 kV to 765, the Permian was the right place to start that discussion, because I think the load is coming there, and as opposed to, say, maybe the eastern part of the state, I think there is a lot of confidence that the load in the Permian is real, and it will be there on the timeline that people say. I think you can make a real argument that the state is underinvested in transmission in the Permian for the better part of a decade and a half. And so we're catching up and trying to get ahead of it a little bit. The other thing I think that probably doesn't get enough attention is looking to transmission companies as far as grid enhancing technologies, whether that be dynamic line rating or advanced conductors, to try to get as much efficiency in the existing system as possible. I think we have some megawatts of capacity that we can definitely continue to squeeze out of the existing system. And I think before we just look to continually add, you have to look at those kind of upgrades to the existing system as well.
So this is the Texas Nuclear Summit after all, so I am going to ask a nuclear question now, now that we're 20 minutes in. But and I want to talk about one of the benefits that I think a lot of people in this room see with respect to nuclear, and particularly in the context of this infrastructure problem. If you look at a lot of the announced projects, they're in Texas, whether it's Dow and X Energy's project at Seadrift or Fermi America's project up in the Panhandle, or even what Relish campus is doing in Texas at Texas A&M. What that load is, or what that generation is hoping to serve, is AI in the case of Relish and Fermi America, and downstream oil and gas petrochemical operations in the case of Dow. And it's either behind the meter and or co-location that's happening. And so nuclear has the potential to, I think, help solve some of these infrastructure problems by being co-located in some of these areas, even particularly, potentially in the oil, Permian Basin for oil and gas operations. So how do you guys see nuclear maybe potentially changing the way we've traditionally viewed, quote unquote, the grid?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I talk at a lot of conferences, and one of the things I tell people all the time, particularly at clean energy conferences, which tend to focus a lot on batteries, wind, and solar, is if you believe in a clean environment and clean air, and you don't think that nuclear is going to be a part of and a big part of that solution, then one, I don't think you're maths in Texas, and two, I don't think you're serious about actually fixing the problem, because from everything I've seen, nuclear can serve a lot of different purposes On the small modular side, like you said, I think we can find pockets where generation is needed for specific customers and help alleviate that need through small modular reactors and the like. I'm also hopeful that at utility scale nuclear can be something that we really start talking about again, not just re-upping existing plants, but talking about expanding existing sites to put new reactors at. Because again, I think everyone cares about the environment, everyone wants clean air, and if you do, nuclear has to be a big part of the solution. And what I love about being in Texas is our state leadership is at the forefront of this. They've made meaningful investment this last session in nuclear because I think they see with all of the businesses and folks coming to Texas, we need to be at the forefront of pushing nuclear in this state because it's going to be a key to serving our load for decades and centuries to come, honestly.
So on this topic, and this is a good segue into the other side of the supply and demand equation. We've talked a lot about demand and transmission. On the supply side, I mean, Texas has enjoyed an incredibly reliable and frankly incredibly affordable power market for really the last couple decades. And obviously that has changed, and I defend some of the price increases as a pretty obvious consequence of the Texas miracle, whether that's 1,000 people a day moving here or businesses wanting to come here and build their operations here. Inevitably, you have 20 years of that type of growth, and supply and demand dictates that prices are going to go up. But it seems to me, and this is I'm not an economist, so I ought to be careful here, but it seems to me that there's a mismatch between what we see in the price environment versus the demand forecast that we see on this screen right now. And so my somewhat provocative question is, which one is wrong?
Well, I would always tell you both are wrong. I think that we don't know exactly how much load is going to go. I did a little bit of research back when I was a kid in the 80s. I think we had about 15 million people in the state. We're at about 32 million. We've had that growth for quite some time, and that's huge. I think our GDP was 300 billion or something back then, and it's 2 trillion now. You don't do that without a lot of behind-the-scenes growth in the transmission system, because a lot of this is driven by electrification. Right. We're going to continue to see that. This is definitely showing that we're going to continue that trend in growth. So that's really important. I think that the prices don't reflect that growth yet because they're looking at the 200 number, and nobody believes that. But I think when you start looking at that 150, we're going to need generation. And so I really think there's a place for these data centers to do these agreements with things like nuclear for a long-term sustainable price for them. And I think that'll be beneficial for them. I think what I've heard, I did some discussions with a Argonne panel, and one of the scientists there says one of these GPUs makes like $2 an hour. You scale that up to like the Stargate. They're probably in their first step that they're going to, which is about 1.2 gigawatts. That's over $1 billion a year. So there's some different economic factors going into these data centers that we haven't seen. And so they have the ability to potentially do agreements with these nuclear plants, which is what you're seeing outside of Texas as well.
Yeah, for me, I agree. They're both, not precise, I would say. But, right now, as I see it, the forward prices into 2030, 2031 reflect none of this growth, even if we take 138 or 145 gigawatts. And again, I think to the previous comment, the issue with that is for us to solve, because if there is faith in the credibility of that load forecast number, you would see those forward prices. And we need that. I think people look at price increases as a negative, but you need those price increases in those out years to provide the incentive for the generation to be built. And so, again, You've probably heard it said before, but the cure for high prices is high prices, because we'll build into it and then prices will go down. And so we need those market signals to be there. I think, again, directionally, that load growth slope is probably close to right in my estimation for the 145 to 150 gigs by 2031, but the prices just don't reflect that.
So talk about, I'm a big defender of our deregulated market, and that's not always a popular opinion in this room. But I think ERCOT is the most innovative market in the U.S. One of the things that we've seen over the last 20 years, really, we'll call it 15 years, is an outsized impact by federal subsidies on renewables. And our generation growth, and I think Bill, you may have a slide on this as well, but our generation growth over that time period has been, by and large, if you're looking at a net number, for many years it was essentially just wind, and now more recently it's solar plus batteries. Those subsidies may or may not be going away, they may or may not come back, but that creates, I think that is impacting a little bit of some of the conversation that we just had about whether or not prices really reflect reality. So I'm not going to sit here and advocate for getting rid of the deregulated market. I don't think that's going to happen in the state of Texas, whether I like it or not. I think we are committed to that model. I think it has worked very well over the last 20 years. I think we have some friction right now, but I don't think we're the only ISO that has that friction either. So talking about tweaks to the market or other things that we can do and there's been a lot of conversation at a public policy level around this, about what to do to maybe value firm, reliable electrons or firm, reliable generation for what it is, which is it's going to show up, it's going to be there. You guys know, nuclear's got 95% capacity factor. It is the most reliable form of energy there is. So just y'all's thoughts on how that conversation has evolved and where it may go, and if you can even balance a deregulated market with market tweaks to maybe fast forward some of these price signals that we know are eventually coming, so that, at the end of the day, what we want to have happen is we don't want the price signals to come too late, right? We want the generation, even the TEF, which is a great idea. To your point, Chairman, if there's no revenue or price signals on the other side of that, then debt capital doesn't help, right? They need the price signals, they need the revenue. So your thoughts on how that conversation has evolved, where it's going, and whether or not we can even really balance a deregulated market with fast forwarding some of those price signals.
Yeah, there's definitely a tension in an energy-only market between low costs and valuing reliability, the reliability of firm resources. So what we look at first is the existing market framework, the revenues that are derived from that framework, and where they're being allocated. So if you look, for instance, at one of the ERCOT services, ECRS, ERCOT, Contingency Reserve Service, Contingency Reliability Service, when that was initially instituted, people assumed that would almost all go to thermal dispatchable units. Batteries take up the overwhelming majority of that now. You've had a reallocation of those revenues. And so I think it's incumbent on us to kind of look at those existing revenue streams and have honest and open debate about, are they being directed to the right places for the outcomes we're looking for, or do we need to look to reallocate those to different resources to get the kind of behavior we're looking for? The other thing is looking at new services. So one that was put into statute, DRS, Dispatchable Reliability Reserve Service. The statute lays out some attributes of the types of generation resources that would be eligible to receive those. I think what you'll see if you follow this over the coming months is a real discussion about if a battery has the attributes to meet the statutory design, should those batteries be allowed to get those revenues. And so I think discussions like that will continue to happen, because I don't think I've run into anyone in the Capitol who believes we don't have a shortage of thermal dispatchable units in the interconnection queue. The real debate is about how do we get the outcomes we're looking for, while again, focusing on not just reliability, but also cost. The real goal of, I would say, the politicians in the building is, we want all of this to happen, but we don't want to overpay for it. That's in theory what an energy-only market should be doing, should be, providing incentives for. It's just our job, along with ERCOT, to develop these different products to get those outcomes that we're solving for. And I think we can. I think the legislature's done a good job of giving us a framework for all of this for us to work within, and then really come up with policy solutions that get us the dispatchable generation we're looking for.
Bill, I think maybe a slightly different take on this topic with respect to nuclear. You and I had a great conversation a few days ago about, everyone knows that nuclear is extremely reliable and shows up in 95% capacity factor, et cetera, but it also has some other grid attributes that, are valuable, particularly when you look at, the growth in wind and solar and batteries. Nuclear brings some balancing effect to the grid that is beyond just the reliability factor.
Yeah, I guess some of the kind of more technical pieces of this is, as we've had this ramp up of the renewables, they're designed differently. They don't give us inertia on the system. And so as we've had our load grow, our inertia hasn't really grown. And so if we have, some event on the system, it swings the system a lot more than if we had the inertia on the system. So the nuclear plants and some of the thermal plants that are dispatchable give you that inertia, and that actually stabilizes our frequency. And additionally, the inverter-based generation that we have, we built a lot of transmission for. We end up finding there's limitations to how much we can transfer over a particular path. And if we had some synchronous generation that was also in there, it actually increases the transfer capability on the path because of having a strong 60 hertz signal right there that all these other inverters can follow. When you get too many inverters in an area, that could be a weak grid condition, and actually that causes limitations, so you don't get the full benefit of what you built. And so there is some benefit in having that style of generation to getting actually more out of the transmission system as well.
So, to put you on the spot a little bit, should the market value that?
I believe I value it as a grid operator, so I would hope that the market would.
Yes. Yeah, it absolutely should. Those are attributes we need. And again, to Bill's point, as we're getting more inverter-based resources, the attributes and the benefits that thermal dispatchable units bring on, we need to find a way to value them.
It looks like I've got triple zeros here, but any last words for this group here?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I would just say, Texas is very pro-nuclear. I think what happened this last session was extremely important in really getting this movement going. Reed and I have talked before about how you've seen in the past kind of opportunities to really push nuclear, and I don't know that they were fully utilized. I think this is our time. I think there's a lot of momentum behind this, not just in the state, but at the federal level, and I'm excited for that. I think, just quickly, a few thanks, obviously, to Governor Abbott for his push on this, to you for forming the Texas Nuclear Alliance, which I think was instrumental in getting a lot of really good policy implemented this session. And finally, I don't know if he's here, but former PUC Commissioner Jimmy Glotfelty, who led the Texas Advanced Nuclear Working Group and really did a lot of the legwork to get these policies going. I think all three of you deserve a lot of credit for not only where we sit today, but where we're gonna end up. And I think everyone owes you a debt of gratitude for all of that.
Well, thank you for saying that. We also owe you guys a debt of gratitude. I think that, this is a tough topic right now because of the numbers we've been looking at. You guys don't have easy jobs, and they're very visible jobs. And obviously we're very appreciative of everything you guys are doing to make it all work for us. So, Chairman, Bill, thank you all for being here. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks, Shel.
Thank you.
I might be mistaken.